December 1944, Stalag 9B, Bad Orb, Germany. A Wehrmacht guard maintained his post at the newly established prisoner compound, observing American POWs pass through the entrance. His instructions were explicit. Divide the prisoners according to race. White servicemen to the primary camp, black servicemen to the segregated quarters with diminished rations and no Red Cross benefits. It was routine protocol. The Wehrmacht had implemented these practices based on American military segregation. If the Americans themselves divided their soldiers by race, certainly it suggested these Negro troops were inferior, necessitating different handling. The guard moved toward the first group of black prisoners ready to shout commands in German, anticipating blank stares and confusion. Routine protocol, gesture, yell, direct them toward their designated location. But before he could utter a word, one of the prisoners spoke to him directly in impeccable German with a Bavarian dialect. Guten Morgen, Herr Wachter. We comprehend your orders completely. Would you prefer we organize ranks by height or by unit designation? The guard stopped cold. The prisoner stood at attention, military posture flawless, eyes straight ahead, awaiting response like a Prussian officer trainee. Behind him, other black soldiers waited in precise formation, their discipline apparent, their grasp of military protocol evident. This wasn't what the guard had been instructed to anticipate. Wehrmacht intelligence briefings characterized American Negro troops as inadequately educated, minimally trained, appropriate only for manual duties. No one referenced they might speak German. No one indicated they might grasp military tactics better than some of the guards supervising them. Throughout the subsequent months, German guards at multiple POW camps would learn that their presumptions about race and military capability were disastrously incorrect. Some of the black American prisoners they supervised were better educated than their captors, spoke multiple languages fluently, and possessed military expertise that would preserve lives on both sides. This is the account of how black POWs demolished German expectations, endured harsh captivity, and demonstrated that intelligence, education, and military competence have nothing to do with skin color. Before we proceed, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. These are the accounts that challenge everything we assumed we understood about World War II. The seizure of black American soldiers by German forces during World War II generated a complicated situation that Wehrmacht leadership had never sufficiently prepared for. Nazi racial ideology pronounced black people inferior. Yet these prisoners arrived wearing American uniforms, carrying weapons, and having fought with competence that contradicted every presumption. By late 1944, thousands of black American soldiers had been seized during various operations. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 resulted in the largest number of American POWs taken in a single operation during the war. Over 23,000 men captured in the initial German offensive. Among them were hundreds of black soldiers from segregated units, including men from the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, transportation companies, and combat engineer units. The Wehrmacht's initial processing of these prisoners revealed immediate complications. Standard interrogation procedures assumed prisoners would require translators, that educational levels would be minimal, that military knowledge would be basic. These assumptions functioned reasonably well for many captured soldiers, but they failed spectacularly when applied to certain black American POWs. Historical records document numerous instances of German interrogators being astonished by prisoners who spoke fluent German, French, and Italian. Some black POWs were college graduates with degrees in languages. When German interrogators attempted to deceive them by switching between languages during questioning, these prisoners calmly responded in whichever language was used, sometimes correcting their interrogators' grammar errors. Interrogation reports from various camps note this phenomenon repeatedly. One German intelligence officer wrote in his report, "Prisoner exhibits education level superior to many German officers. Speaks Hochdeutsch with better accent than this interrogator. Previously held assumptions about Negro intellectual capability require revision." Other captured soldiers had studied engineering at historically black colleges like Tuskegee Institute before the war. When German guards discovered technical manuals in their possession, they assumed the materials had been stolen from white officers. These prisoners demonstrated otherwise by explaining complex mechanical systems in technical German, using terminology that even camp engineers recognized as professional and accurate. Some black POWs had been high school teachers before the war, specializing in European history and German literature. They could quote Goethe, discuss Prussian military reforms, and analyze Wehrmacht tactical doctrine with sophistication that unnerved their captors. Camp records document instances of prisoners correcting guards' misunderstandings of German military theory in German, leaving the guards visibly shaken. These weren't isolated cases. Among the thousands of Black American POWs, German guards encountered teachers, college graduates, skilled tradesmen, and professional soldiers whose education and capabilities demolished every stereotype Nazi ideology had taught them to believe. The German response to this cognitive dissonance varied. Some guards, particularly younger ones indoctrinated since childhood in Nazi racial theories, simply refused to acknowledge what they witnessed. They attributed language skills to exceptional individuals, treating them as anomalies that didn't challenge the broader racial hierarchy they'd been taught. Others, particularly older Wehrmacht soldiers who remembered Germany before the Nazi era, found their worldviews cracking. Diary entries recovered after the war reveal guards wrestling with what they observed. One career soldier wrote, "The American Negro prisoners are not what we were told. Some are educated men. Some speak better German than my own children. I do not understand how we were so wrong about this." The SS and Gestapo maintained harder positions. When reports reached higher commands about educated Black POWs, some SS officers suggested they must be exceptions. Perhaps children of mixed marriages, possibly educated in Europe. The alternative, that Nazi racial theories were fundamentally flawed, was too threatening to their entire ideological structure to contemplate. But for the guards who interacted daily with these prisoners, denial became increasingly difficult. The evidence accumulated in countless small interactions. Black POWs who translated for other prisoners, who understood complex orders without explanation, who demonstrated knowledge of military tactics during camp administration discussions, who read German newspapers and discussed current events with sophisticated analysis. Post-war testimonies document particularly striking cases. Some captured Black soldiers had unusual international backgrounds, raised abroad, multilingual from childhood with combat experience on multiple continents. When these men were captured and interrogated, German intelligence officers couldn't process what they encountered. Reports to higher headquarters were sometimes marked "requires verification." Prisoner claims seem exaggerated. But the claims weren't exaggerated. The segregated American military had concentrated educated Black men into specific units precisely because white commanders didn't want them competing for positions with white soldiers. This meant that when entire units were captured, German guards suddenly faced groups of prisoners whose average education level was higher than that of typical Wehrmacht enlisted men. The 333rd Field Artillery Battalion, decimated during the Battle of the Bulge with many survivors captured, included college graduates, skilled technicians and professional soldiers. When these men arrived at POW camps, German administrators discovered they needed translators less than expected. Many prisoners could read German orders themselves and explain them to fellow POWs who couldn't. This created practical complications for camp administration. Standard procedure involved using German-speaking prisoners as intermediaries, but this required trusting those prisoners with information that might include military intelligence. German camp commanders taught to view Black prisoners as less threatening than white ones suddenly faced the reality that some of their Black prisoners understood military matters better than their guards. At several camps, this led to unusual situations. German-speaking Black POWs were employed in camp administration, translating orders and managing prisoner work details. Camp commandants initially objected. Using Negro prisoners in administrative roles violated their understanding of proper racial hierarchy. But practical necessity won. The Black prisoners who spoke German were more reliable translators than the available alternatives, and their military bearing and discipline made them effective intermediaries. This created strange inversions of the expected power dynamic. Black prisoners issuing orders to German guards, translating Wehrmacht directives, sometimes correcting German officers' mistakes. The ideology said this was impossible. Reality insisted otherwise. The ability to speak German and understand military protocols wasn't merely impressive. It became a survival tool for Black POWs facing systematically worse treatment than white prisoners. Wehrmacht policy influenced by both Nazi racial ideology and a cynical exploitation of American segregation mandated reduced rations for Black prisoners. While white American POWs received Red Cross packages and standard Geneva Convention treatment, Black prisoners often received half rations and were denied access to medical care, recreation and correspondence privileges. The official German justification was disturbing in its logic. If America itself considered Negro soldiers inferior enough to segregate them, then Germany was simply acknowledging American racial classifications. Wehrmacht administrators pointed to U.S. military segregation as evidence that black soldiers deserved inferior treatment. This placed black POWs in immediate danger. Reduced rations in winter 1944-45 when food was already scarce throughout Germany meant starvation. Denied medical care meant preventable deaths. The combination of malnutrition, exposure, and disease killed thousands of Allied POWs in German camps during the war's final months, and black prisoners faced even higher mortality rates. Language skills became a matter of life and death. Historical accounts describe German-speaking prisoners using their linguistic ability to negotiate with guards for additional food. They pointed out inconsistencies in German orders, identified when guards were lying about ration availability, and argued in legal German, citing Geneva Convention provisions for better treatment. These arguments rarely succeeded in changing policy, but they occasionally succeeded in changing individual guards' behavior. A guard who could be shamed in his own language, who could be confronted with the contradiction between German military honor and the reality of starving prisoners, sometimes found extra bread. Sometimes looked away when prisoners organized additional supplies. Sometimes acted like a soldier rather than a jailer. Prisoners with technical knowledge used their skills to make themselves valuable. German factories desperately short of skilled labor used POWs for industrial work, which violated Geneva Convention prohibitions on using prisoners for war production but which Germany ignored when convenient. Camp records show that German administrators desperately needed skilled workers who could operate complex machinery. Prisoners who demonstrated engineering knowledge, explaining how to fix broken equipment in technical German, secured assignments to workshops where food was better and conditions less brutal than in the main camp. This was dangerous territory. Helping German war production could be seen as collaboration, but prisoners navigated a careful line. They fixed machinery enough to be valuable, but not enough to meaningfully help German war efforts. They took longer on repairs than necessary. They accidentally miscalibrated equipment. They used their knowledge to survive while subtly sabotaging the very system that exploited them. Some prisoners used their knowledge of German military history to build rapport with older guards. They discovered that Wehrmacht veterans, particularly those who'd served in World War I, often felt conflicted about Nazi racial policies. These older soldiers remembered Germany before Hitler, remembered a more cosmopolitan German culture. Post-war accounts describe prisoners engaging these guards in conversations about Prussian military traditions, about German philosophy, about European history. They quoted Schiller and Heine, German poets these guards knew from their youth. They discussed military campaigns with knowledge that revealed their respect for German military competence even while fighting against Germany. These conversations didn't change guards' behavior dramatically, but they humanized black POWs in ways that sometimes mattered. A guard who discussed Goethe with a prisoner was less likely to beat that prisoner. A soldier who'd been engaged in serious conversation about military tactics was more likely to slip extra food when he could. The knowledge of military protocol also provided protection. Black POWs who understood Wehrmacht regulations could cite specific orders when guards violated them. They knew that certain punishments required officer approval. They understood the paperwork requirements for prisoner transfers. They recognized when guards were acting within German military law and when they were exceeding their authority. This knowledge didn't prevent abuse. German guards who wanted to mistreat prisoners could usually find ways to do so. But it created a framework for negotiation, for appealing to military professionalism over racial hatred, for exploiting the bureaucratic nature of Wehrmacht administration. Historical records document instances of prisoners using their understanding of German military hierarchy to protect other captives. When guards attempted to execute prisoners for alleged escape attempts, knowledgeable POWs demanded in formal German that matters be referred to camp commandants as required by Wehrmacht regulations. Guards surprised by prisoners' knowledge and formal language sometimes hesitated. That hesitation allowed time for appeals to commandants who recognized that executing prisoners without proper investigation would create problems with higher command. The prisoners were punished but not killed. Small victories that saved lives. The ability to understand what German guards said among themselves also provided crucial intelligence. Black POWs who spoke German could eavesdrop on guard conversations, learning about camp security, food shipments, potential transfers, and most importantly, news from the front. As the war entered its final months and Germany's collapse became inevitable, knowing what guards knew about military situations became critical for survival. Prisoners who understood that Germany was losing could prepare for the chaos of collapse. Those who heard guards discussing evacuation plans could position themselves to avoid death marches. Those who learned about approaching Allied forces could time escape attempts or simply survive long enough to be liberated. Language skills and military knowledge also enabled Black POWs to help their fellow prisoners. Those who spoke German translated important information, explained German orders, warned others about dangers, and negotiated on behalf of those who couldn't communicate with guards. This created informal leadership structures within prisoner populations. Education and language skills rather than military rank often determined who became trusted leaders among Black POWs. Men who could navigate the German system, who understood both American and German military culture, who could translate and negotiate. These men became essential to collective survival. The presence of educated German-speaking Black POWs created a profound cognitive dissonance for German guards that some never resolved but that changed others permanently. For younger guards, those raised entirely under Nazi ideology, the contradiction was particularly acute. They'd been taught since childhood that racial hierarchy was scientific fact, that Black people were biologically inferior, that Aryan superiority was natural law. Encountering evidence that directly contradicted these teachings created psychological crisis. Some resolved this crisis through denial. They classified educated Black prisoners as exceptions that proved the rule. They argued that these men must have mixed ancestry, must have been educated by white teachers, must be somehow different from typical Negroes. This mental gymnastics allowed them to maintain their racist worldview while acknowledging the specific individuals they encountered. Others, particularly as Germany's military situation deteriorated and faith in Nazi leadership wavered, began questioning deeper assumptions. If racial theories were wrong about these Black American soldiers, what else might Nazi ideology be wrong about? Private diaries recovered after the war document this transformation. In December 1944, guards wrote about being confused by Negro prisoners who contradicted everything they'd been taught. By March 1945, as Germany's collapse became obvious, these entries had evolved into broader questioning of Nazi ideology itself. Guards wrote about being lied to, about realizing their government had made them complicit in great evil, about learning lessons from prisoners they'd been taught to despise. Not every guard experienced such transformation. Many maintained their racism until death. But enough German soldiers encountered educated Black POWs that the experience created cracks in Nazi racial ideology's foundation. The SS and dedicated Nazis responded to reports of educated Black prisoners with various forms of denial. Some argued the prisoners were lying about their education. Others suggested American propaganda had trained them to memorize German phrases. Still others insisted that any education these men possessed proved the benefits of white civilization, not Negro capability. But these arguments became harder to maintain as evidence accumulated. Black prisoners who discussed complex technical matters, who translated military documents accurately, who analyzed Wehrmacht tactical decisions with sophistication, who demonstrated knowledge spanning literature, engineering, history, and military science. Intelligence reports from early 1945 made the contradiction explicit. One interrogation officer wrote a classified report that stated, "Continued interaction with educated Negro prisoners forces reconsideration of racial capabilities. These men demonstrate intelligence, education, and military competence indistinguishable from white prisoners. Previous assessments based on racial theory appear fundamentally flawed." The report was suppressed. Higher command had no interest in documents questioning Nazi ideology, particularly as military collapse made ideological purity seem more important than empirical accuracy. But the officer wasn't alone in his conclusions. Across multiple POW camps, German administrators quietly noted that Black American prisoners who spoke German were more reliable workers, better at following complex instructions, and more disciplined than many German soldiers. Camp efficiency often improved when educated Black POWs were employed in administrative roles. This created absurd situations where ideology and practice openly contradicted. Official policy mandated treating Black prisoners as inferior. Practical administration relied on educated Black prisoners to maintain camp function. Guards who theoretically believed in racial hierarchy found themselves taking orders translated by Black POWs, depending on Black prisoners' knowledge to understand American military procedures, and sometimes even seeking advice from Black prisoners on military matters. The liberation of POW camps in early 1945 brought these contradictions into sharp focus. When American forces arrived at camps holding Black POWs, they found men who'd survived through intelligence, education, and determination. They also found German guards who'd been fundamentally changed by encounters with prisoners who demolished every racist assumption they'd been taught. Post-war testimonies revealed that some German guards who'd gotten to know educated black prisoners were relieved when Americans arrived. Some apologized, not for the war but for how prisoners had been treated based on lies they believed. Older guards told prisoners that learning their assumptions were wrong was a gift, though one given while prisoners suffered. Other camps had different experiences. Dedicated Nazi commandants refused to acknowledge that educated black prisoners challenged racial theory. Even during surrender, they insisted that prisoners' education was irrelevant to racial classifications. But younger guards, observers noticed, looked at black prisoners differently, with a recognition that everything they'd been taught was questionable. The post-war lives of these black POWs reflected the bitter irony of their situation. They'd survived German captivity, proved their intelligence and capability to skeptical captors, and demonstrated that racist assumptions were lies. Then they returned to a segregated America where they faced many of the same assumptions they'd challenged in POW camps. Veterans returned to a country where they couldn't vote in their home states despite their military service. They faced discrimination in employment despite their education and military experience. They returned to teaching in segregated schools that received a fraction of funding given to white schools, or to jobs beneath their qualifications because of skin color. The German guards who'd been changed by encounters with educated black POWs went on to various fates. Some became advocates for racial equality in post-war Germany. Others quietly abandoned racist beliefs but never spoke publicly about their transformations. Still others reverted to prejudice once the immediate evidence of black prisoners' capabilities was removed from daily view. The story of German guards surprised by German-speaking black POWs reveals a profound truth about racial ideology. It cannot withstand sustained contact with reality. Nazi racial theories weren't based on evidence. They were based on assumptions designed to justify predetermined conclusions about human hierarchy. When those assumptions met actual human beings who contradicted them, the theories failed. Not immediately, not universally, but definitively. The black American POWs who spoke German, understood military tactics, and demonstrated education that surprised their captors didn't set out to challenge Nazi ideology. They were simply being themselves, educated, competent, professional soldiers whose capabilities had nothing to do with skin color. But by being themselves in an environment where their very existence contradicted official ideology, they became involuntary teachers. They taught German guards that racial theories were lies. They demonstrated that intelligence, education, and military competence transcend racial categories. They proved through their daily existence that Nazi assumptions about racial hierarchy were fundamentally false. This teaching came at tremendous cost. Black POWs suffered reduced rations, denied medical care, and systematic discrimination even while imprisoned. They survived conditions that killed thousands, and returned home to a country that still practiced legal segregation. The German guards they educated about racial equality would go free while these black soldiers continued fighting for basic civil rights in their own nation. The irony was bitter and obvious. Black soldiers proved their equality to Nazi captors more successfully than to their own military, which kept them segregated throughout the war. They demonstrated their capabilities in POW camps while being denied opportunities in their own army. They challenged German racial assumptions while living under American racial restrictions. Yet their impact endured. The German guards who recognized that educated black prisoners demolished racial theories carried that knowledge forward. Some became advocates for racial equality in post-war Germany. Others simply raised their children differently, teaching them that racial hierarchies were lies. The historical record preserves fragments of these encounters. Diary entries from German guards wrestling with contradictions between ideology and experience. Intelligence reports noting prisoners' unexpected education and language skills. Post-war testimonies from both black POWs and German guards describing relationships that challenged assumptions on both sides. These fragments reveal a larger truth. Racist ideology cannot survive sustained exposure to the people it claims to categorize. When individual human beings are encountered as individuals rather than stereotypes, when their actual capabilities are observed rather than assumed, the lies that justify racism become unsustainable. The German guards were surprised when black POWs spoke perfect German and understood military tactics because their ideology insisted such things were impossible. The evidence of their eyes and ears told them otherwise. That contradiction multiplied across thousands of interactions and dozens of camps created cracks in Nazi racial ideology that some guards never reconciled, but that others used as starting points for questioning everything they'd been taught. The black POWs themselves displayed remarkable restraint and humanity. They could have met German racism with hatred, could have refused to help their captors understand anything, could have taken pleasure in German guards' confusion. Instead, many used their education and language skills to survive, to help fellow prisoners, and sometimes even to educate guards about the lies they'd been taught. Post-war interviews with veterans revealed their perspective on these experiences. They didn't speak German to impress German guards. They spoke German because they knew German. They didn't demonstrate their education to prove anything. They were simply educated. But they watched German guards struggle with what that meant, saw some guards change while others maintained their prejudices, and understood that they'd confronted captors with evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions. That confrontation between racist assumption and undeniable reality is the enduring lesson of these encounters. Ideology insists on categories and hierarchies. Reality presents individual human beings whose capabilities and characters don't fit the categories. When the two collide, those willing to acknowledge reality learn. Those committed to ideology find increasingly desperate rationalizations. The German guards who learned from educated Black POWs discovered what racists of every era eventually discover when forced to confront evidence. That the classifications they believed were natural are artificial. That the hierarchies they thought were biological are social constructs. That the inferiority they assumed was real is a lie designed to justify injustice. The Black American POWs who taught them these lessons through simply being themselves demonstrated extraordinary courage. Not the courage of battle, though many had shown that too, but the courage of maintaining dignity, demonstrating capability, and asserting humanity in an environment designed to deny all three. Their story deserves remembrance not just as military history but as testimony to the power of individual human beings to challenge systems of oppression through the simple act of being undeniably, competently, courageously themselves. The German guards were surprised. The Black POWs weren't. They'd known all along what they were capable of. They'd simply been waiting for others to recognize it. And in POW camps across Germany in 1944 and 1945, some guards finally did.